They took everything. My ex-wife and her slick lawyer lover stripped me bare. My house, my business, 7.7 million in savings, even custody of my 2 kids. When I begged her to stop, she smirked and said, "Sue me. I'm untouchable." But fate had other plans. Broke and hopeless, I walked into a dusty old bank to close my grandfather's forgotten savings account. It should have held $40. The teller went pale. What she whispered next changed everything. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Hit like, subscribe, and let's uncover what happened next. Before my world crumbled, I used to wake up every morning to sunlight spilling through the tall glass windows of our Portland home. The scent of fresh coffee, the laughter of my kids running around the kitchen, that was my life. A life I believed I'd earned through sweat, sacrifice, and love. My name's Daniel Miller, and 5 years ago, I thought I had it all. I wasn't born into wealth. My grandfather, Robert Miller, was an old-school man who worked at a paper mill for 40 years. He believed in hard work, loyalty, and saving every dime. He used to tell me, "Daniel, a man's worth isn't measured by what he earns. It's by what he can build and protect." Those words stayed with me when I decided to start my own construction business in my 20s. It began as a small firm renovating houses with a single truck and 3 employees. I worked nights, weekends, holidays, whatever it took. Slowly, the company grew. By the time I hit my mid-30s, Miller Construction and Design was one of the most reputable contracting firms in the Pacific Northwest. That's around when I met Emily. She was stunning, smart, confident, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and draw every eye without trying. She worked in real estate, and one of our projects brought us together. We clicked instantly. I admired her drive, her sharp wit, her charm. Within 2 years, we were married. Our early years were perfect, or at least, they looked that way. We bought a beautiful 3-story home in Lake Oswego, built a strong business partnership, and had 2 amazing children. Lucas, born first, then Sophie 3 years later. My life revolved around them. Every success felt brighter when I saw their faces. Emily was deeply involved in the business too. She managed client relations and handled part of the finances. I trusted her completely. I used to tell people, "Emily's the brain behind the beauty." Together, we were unstoppable. But slowly, something shifted. At first, it was small things. Emily started dressing up more often, saying she had meetings downtown. She'd come home late, smelling faintly of expensive perfume I didn't recognize. She stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped asking about work. I chalked it up to stress. We had 2 kids, a business to run, and a mortgage to maintain. I remember one evening vividly. We were sitting on the porch, sipping wine. I looked at her and said, "Remember when we dreamed of this house? You told me you wanted a kitchen big enough for the kids to chase each other in." She smiled faintly but didn't meet my eyes. "Dreams change, Daniel," she said softly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when we'd drifted so far apart. Weeks passed. The distance grew. She started taking business trips more frequently. When I asked for details, she'd snap, "You don't trust me. Is that what this is about?" I didn't want to argue. I was already drowning in deadlines and projects. So, I convinced myself it was just a phase. On weekends, I tried to make things feel normal. I took Lucas to his soccer games, helped Sophie build her Lego castles, and cooked pancakes on Sundays, Emily's favorite. But she rarely joined us anymore. She'd stay in bed late, scrolling on her phone, saying she needed rest. Our marriage was quietly unraveling. I just didn't see it yet. One Friday evening, my friend and business partner, Tom, called. "Dan," he said cautiously, "I saw Emily downtown at the Birch with someone. They looked close." I laughed it off. "You've got it wrong, man. Emily's working with clients all the time." But Tom hesitated. "She wasn't working, brother. They were holding hands." That was the first time I felt something cold stir in my gut, a quiet, creeping dread I didn't want to believe. Still, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. I loved her too much. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, Emily was my wife, my partner, my confidant. She'd never betray me, right? At night, while the kids slept, I'd watch her from across the room as she typed away on her laptop. Sometimes she'd smile at her screen in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. I'd ask who she was chatting with, and she'd answer casually, "Just Mark, my lawyer friend from downtown. He's helping with some contracts." Mark. I remembered him vaguely, a tall, well-dressed man who handled a few of our legal deals years ago. I thought nothing of it at the time. Looking back now, it's almost laughable how blind I was. Every sign was there. The secrecy, the late nights, the unexplained smiles. But love has a way of making you see what you want to see. If I could go back, I'd shake my younger self and tell him, "Open your eyes, Daniel. The storm's coming." Because just a few weeks later, that storm hit, and it tore my world apart. It started with a text message. One night, Emily left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to tuck the kids in. It buzzed, once, twice, then again. Normally, I wouldn't have cared. We respected each other's privacy. But something inside me, maybe instinct, maybe desperation, made me glance at the screen. The preview read, "Can't wait to see you again, gorgeous. Last night was incredible. Mark." My heart sank so fast I thought I'd pass out. I just stood there, staring at the glowing words, waiting for them to disappear or change. Anything that could make it not real. But it was real. When Emily came downstairs, she froze the moment she saw me holding her phone. Her face drained of color. "Daniel, give me that," she said, trying to sound calm, but her voice trembled. I set the phone down slowly. "How long?" I asked. Her lips parted, but no words came. "How long, Emily?" My voice cracked. After a moment, she crossed her arms and said coldly, "Don't do this right now. Not in front of the kids." She walked past me like nothing happened. That night, she slept in the guest room. The next morning, she acted as if everything were normal, made coffee, got the kids ready for school, and kissed them goodbye. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. For a week, I tried to hold it together. I wanted to believe there was some explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But late one night, I drove to the city. Tom had been right. Through the restaurant window, I saw Emily and Mark sitting close together, laughing. His hand rested on hers. She looked happy, happier than I'd seen her in years. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. I just sat in my truck in the rain, gripping the steering wheel, my chest so tight it hurt to breathe. When she came home later, I was waiting in the living room. "So it's true," I said quietly. Emily sighed, set down her purse, and looked at me with something between pity and irritation. "Daniel, please. You're being dramatic." "Dramatic? You're sleeping with our lawyer." She didn't deny it. She just said, "Maybe if you'd been around more, if you actually listened instead of living at the office, I wouldn't have needed to find comfort somewhere else." That hit me like a punch. "So it's my fault you cheated?" "I'm not doing this right now," she said flatly. "We're over, Daniel. I've already talked to Mark about filing for divorce." My world tilted. "You what?" "I'm sorry," she said, but her tone was anything but. "This isn't working. It hasn't for a long time. You know that." I just stood there, silent, as she went upstairs. I could hear her on the phone a few minutes later, whispering, laughing softly. With him. The divorce papers came a week later. The name on the top corner, Mark Wallace, attorney at law. It felt like a sick joke. The same man who'd shared dinners at our house, who'd toasted our business success, was now my wife's lawyer and her lover. I hired my own attorney, but it didn't matter. Emily and Mark had everything planned out. They twisted facts, manipulated finances, and painted me as an absent husband who neglected his family for work. During the hearings, I sat across from them. Emily in a crisp white blouse, Mark whispering in her ear like a vulture feeding on carrion. Every time our eyes met, she looked away. One afternoon, during a recess, I overheard her laugh softly and say to him, "He doesn't stand a chance." My lawyer, Janet, tried her best, but Mark was ruthless. He used every loophole he could find, every shred of information Emily had about her finances. When the ruling came, I sat there numb as the judge spoke. "The house will be awarded to Mrs. Miller. Custody of the children to Mrs. Miller. The business and all shared assets, including savings, will also be transferred under her management pending review." I felt the floor vanish beneath me. Emily didn't even flinch. Mark smiled faintly, like he'd just won a game. After the hearing, I followed her outside. "Emily, please. You're taking everything. The kids, the house, the business we built together." She turned, eyes cold. "You can rebuild. You're good at that, aren't you? Just start over." "Don't do this," I begged. "They're our kids, Emily." She smirked. "Sue me," then leaned closer. "I'm untouchable." That was the last time I saw the woman I'd married. A few weeks later, she moved into our old house with Mark. My kids called me from their rooms, whispering that Mommy and Uncle Mark were always together. Lucas asked if I'd done something wrong. I couldn't answer. I rented a small apartment near the city. Half the furniture came from thrift stores. Every night, I sat staring at the empty space where my family used to be. The silence was unbearable. I thought about my grandfather a lot then. He'd been gone for years, but his words haunted me. Protect what you build, Daniel. The world's full of takers. I finally understood what he meant. I was broken, stripped of everything. My fortune, my business, my children, my dignity. All I had left was an old passbook from my grandfather's savings account, tucked away in a box of keepsakes. I remembered him opening it when I was a kid, laughing as he deposited a few dollars for me. Someday, you'll appreciate this, he'd said. At the time, it had maybe $40 in it. That's all I thought it was worth. Until the day I walked into the bank and discovered that my grandfather had left me something more powerful than revenge itself. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. On paper, it was just a series of signatures and court stamps. In reality, it was a funeral, the burial of everything I'd built for nearly 20 years. I remember sitting in that courtroom as the judge read through the final terms, my hands trembling on the table. My lawyer, Janet, whispered something about an appeal, but her voice was distant, like an echo underwater. Emily was radiant, perfectly dressed, calm, composed. Mark sat beside her, flipping through documents like he already owned me. Maybe he did. When the judge announced, custody of the children to Mrs. Miller. Full ownership of Miller Construction and Design transferred to Mrs. Miller and her legal representative, Mark Wallace. Pending rebranding. I felt something in me break. I didn't fight back. I couldn't. I was exhausted, mentally, financially, emotionally. The house, the business, the cars, even the vacation cabin I'd inherited from my grandfather, all gone. My bank accounts were drained. Legal fees alone had gutted me. $7.7 million, a lifetime of work, evaporated into her hands with a smile. When we walked out of the courthouse, I tried one last time. Emily, I said, my voice low. Please, not the kids. Don't take them from me. She glanced over her shoulder, sunglasses hiding her eyes. You can visit. Maybe twice a month, if you're stable enough. Stable enough? I repeated, stunned. Mark placed his hand on her back like he was marking territory. It's all in the decree, Daniel, he said smugly. Emily smiled. Move on, Daniel. You'll thank me one day. Then, with that same cruel spark in her voice, she added, and if you don't like it, sue me. I'm untouchable. Those words burned into my brain. I would hear them in my sleep for months. After that, everything blurred together. Empty days, sleepless nights, and a silence that felt like punishment. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The walls were thin, the air smelled like old paint, and the only sound at night was the hum of passing cars. I couldn't afford therapy. I could barely afford food. I stopped shaving. I stopped answering calls. My business email was filled with notices, contracts canceled, clients backing out, suppliers demanding payments I couldn't make. One morning, a tow truck came for my car. I just stood at the window and watched it disappear down the street. I tried to see the kids every weekend, but Emily made excuses. They're busy, or they have school projects. Eventually, the calls stopped altogether. One night, I got drunk alone and stared at old photos on my phone. Lucas was wearing his soccer uniform, grinning with missing teeth. Sophie was sitting on my shoulders, laughing as I pretended to fall over. I broke down. I'd lost everything, not just the money or the company, but the people who gave my life meaning. I remember whispering into the empty room, I'm sorry, Grandpa. I failed. And then, something strange happened. While digging through an old box for my passport, I thought about leaving town for good. I found a small, faded envelope. Inside was a yellowing bank passbook, the corners worn and fragile. The cover read, First Portland Savings and Loan, account holder, Robert Miller/beneficiary, Daniel Miller. I smiled sadly. I remembered my grandfather showing me this when I was maybe 10. He'd deposited a few dollars for me every birthday. The last time I saw it, I was in college, and it had around $40. It wasn't worth anything, but I held on to it because it reminded me of him. Now, sitting there broke and broken, that passbook felt like a relic from a better time. Guess you're the last thing I've got, old man, I said aloud. I decided to close it the next day, Maybe it had a few cents in interest. It would at least give me something to do, something that wasn't drowning in bitterness. The next morning, I walked downtown to the small branch printed on the booklet. It was an old brick building tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore. The same brass plaque from the 1960s still hung by the door. Inside, the place smelled like dust and printer ink. A young teller with red hair smiled politely. Her name tag read Sarah. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked. I handed her the old passbook and said, half jokingly, "I think this thing might be worth enough for a cup of coffee." She chuckled. "Wow, this is ancient. Let's take a look." As she typed the account number, I noticed her expression slowly change. Her smile faded, replaced by confusion. "Sir, one moment, please," she said, glancing at her screen. She stood up and walked to the back, whispering to an older man in a suit. The branch manager, I guessed. They both looked at the screen, then at me. My stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" I asked. They came back together. The manager, a gray-haired man named Mr. Fletcher, cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, this account hasn't been touched in over 60 years. I nodded. "Yeah, it was my grandfather's. He passed away years ago. I just figured I'd close it." Mr. Fletcher adjusted his glasses. "Sir, you might want to sit down." That's when Sarah turned her monitor toward me. My breath caught. It wasn't a few dollars. It wasn't even a few thousand. I stared at the number on the screen, my mind struggling to comprehend it. Sarah whispered, "Sir, this account has been gaining compound interest since 1960. My heart pounded in my chest. "How much?" She turned the monitor fully. The balance glowed in front of me, a number so large, I had to blink to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The teller's eyes were wide with shock. "Mr. Miller, this account is currently valued at over $45 million. I froze. For a long time, I couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt. I felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life. Sarah added softly, "Your grandfather must have been an incredible man." I swallowed hard. "Yeah," I whispered. "He was." That was the moment everything changed. I walked into that bank a broken man. But when I walked out, clutching the paperwork that confirmed the fortune was legally mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. It wasn't just money. It was redemption. A second chance. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being the victim. Because if Emily thought she was untouchable, she was about to find out how wrong she was. When you've lost everything, even the smallest errand feels like a mountain. That morning, I woke up on the couch of a rundown rental, surrounded by empty takeout boxes and unopened bills. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, a reminder that it was still mostly empty, just like my life. I had maybe $200 left to my name. Most of it would go toward overdue utilities and child support, payments I somehow had to make even though my ex now had full custody. The irony was cruel. But there was one small thing I remembered from my grandfather's estate: a dusty envelope he'd given me when I was 16. Inside was a note and a small booklet, a savings account book from 1960. I remember him saying, "Danny, you'll laugh when you see what this is worth one day." At the time, I thought he meant it as a joke. He'd deposited $40 into that account, probably forgotten about it, and I never took it seriously. But that morning, with nothing left, I figured maybe I could close it out, grab a few bucks, and buy some groceries. I drove into town in my old Ford pickup. The transmission groaned like it was complaining about my choices. Downtown looked smaller than I remembered. The same diner, the same barber shop, and the same old bank with its green marble facade, Jefferson Federal Savings. As I walked inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and paper. The place was quiet, almost reverent, like a church. I waited in line behind a woman arguing over her check deposit. When my turn came, a young teller with auburn hair and round glasses greeted me with a polite but tired smile. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" I handed her the old booklet. "I'd like to close this account," I said. "It's from way back, should only have $40 in it, but I figured I'd cash it out." She smiled faintly and took the booklet. But as soon as she typed the number into her computer, her expression changed. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes darted back to the screen. Then she blinked, leaned closer, and typed again, slower this time. "Sir," she said, glancing at me, "could you please wait just a moment?" My stomach twisted. Is something wrong? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she called over another teller. an older man in a blue vest. They whispered, looking back at me a few times. Then the man nodded and walked into the back office. I stood there, heart thudding. People in line behind me began to shift impatiently. Finally, the young teller turned back to me, her face pale. "Sir," she said carefully, "this account has been gaining compound interest since 1960. I frowned, confused. "Okay, so what does that mean? It's been a while, sure, but it's $40. Maybe a few hundred now." She shook her head, visibly nervous. "Sir, that's not exactly it." Before she could finish, the branch manager, a tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, came out from the back. She motioned for me to follow her. "Mr. Walker, would you mind stepping into my office for a moment?" My hands started to tremble. "Is there a problem?" "No, sir," she said. "Just something we need to confirm privately." Inside her office, she turned the monitor so I could see it. Rows of numbers filled the screen, endless columns of accrued interest. She clicked a few more times, her nails tapping nervously against the mouse. Then she stopped and looked up at me. "Mr. Walker, are you aware that this account has been compounding quarterly at a fixed interest rate of 5.5% since 1960? I laughed in disbelief. "That's 65 years. So what, a few thousand?" She exhaled, as if preparing for impact. "Sir, your grandfather made an initial deposit of $40 in 1960. With compound interest and additional bonuses from legacy account programs, the balance today is," she hesitated, $3 for 85, 290.72. I stared at her, speechless. My brain froze. It was like hearing another language. $3 million. The room seemed to spin. I gripped the edge of her desk to steady myself. You must be kidding." She turned the monitor toward me again, letting me see it clearly. The number glowed in black and green digits, impossibly real. "This account has been active under your grandfather's estate all these years. You were listed as the sole beneficiary after his passing. We've been sending annual statements to an old P.O. box, which was never updated." My jaw went slack. I didn't even know that box still existed. She smiled faintly. "Most people don't realize how powerful compound interest can be over 6 decades. The young teller from earlier knocked on the door. "Ma'am, should I prepare the transfer paperwork?" The manager nodded, then looked back at me. "Mr. Walker, would you like to keep the funds here or transfer them to another bank?" I couldn't even speak. My throat was dry, my mind blank. $3 million. After losing everything, after being mocked, humiliated, broken, this felt like a dream I was afraid to wake from. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Transfer it, please." She nodded. "We'll get the documents ready." As I left the office, the teller smiled softly at me, her earlier fear replaced with quiet respect. "Congratulations, sir," she said. "That's one hell of an inheritance." I nodded numbly. My legs felt weak as I walked out into the sunlight. The town looked different now, brighter somehow. The same diner, the same barber shop, but suddenly, I wasn't the man crawling out of the ashes anymore. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at my shaking hands. My mind was racing, not with greed, but with possibility. After everything that had been stolen from me, I finally had the one thing my ex-wife never expected, a second chance. And this time, I wasn't going to waste it. For the first time in years, I felt air in my lungs that didn't hurt. The next morning, I woke up early, made myself a real breakfast, eggs, toast, and coffee, and stared at the transfer receipt from Jefferson Federal. It wasn't a dream. $3.4 million now sat in my account under my name. But I didn't rush out and buy a mansion or a sports car. I didn't even tell anyone, not my friends, not my family, and definitely not my ex-wife. Because if there's one thing I'd learned from losing everything, it's that silence can be the most powerful weapon. I went back to work. Not the business she stole, but the kind of work that built something new. I found an old warehouse on the edge of town for sale, half collapsed, with broken windows and wild ivy growing through the walls. Most people saw a ruin. I saw a resurrection. I spent the next 6 months rebuilding it piece by piece. I hired a handful of workers who'd fallen on hard times. Guys like me who'd been crushed by divorce, layoffs, or life in general. We worked 12-hour days, sweating through the summer, rebuilding the space into something alive. By the time fall came, that warehouse had become Walker Restoration Company, a small business focused on restoring vintage homes and historical buildings. It was honest work, and it gave me purpose again. My hands were blistered, my back ached, but every nail I drove felt like redemption. At night, when the lights dimmed and the crew went home, I'd sit in my office and think about my kids. Emily was 9 now. Jack was 12. The last time I saw them, they were crying as my ex-wife pulled them away. I couldn't stop the court from siding with her. She had the money, the influence, the polished attorney who was also her lover. I was just the broken husband they'd painted as unstable. But now, I wasn't broken. I started putting aside a portion of my new fortune for my children's future, separate accounts under their names, trusts that my ex-wife couldn't touch. I wanted them to know, one day, that their father had never stopped fighting for them, even if he fought in silence. As my company grew, I learned how to play the game that my ex-wife and her lawyer thought they owned. Through careful investments, property flips, and restoration contracts, my net worth tripled within 2 years. My name began showing up in local papers again, not as a failed businessman, but as a rising entrepreneur known for revitalizing old towns. And then one day, fate decided it was time for round 2. I was at a charity gala, one of those upscale events where everyone wears fake smiles and sips champagne like it's holy water. I'd been invited because my company had restored a historic library the foundation was sponsoring. Halfway through the evening, I saw her. My ex-wife, Melissa, draped in a red silk dress, still beautiful, still venomous. And right beside her, him, Richard Cole, the lawyer who'd helped her strip me of everything. They hadn't changed much. They looked polished, successful, untouchable. The same word she'd thrown at me the day she took it all. When she saw me across the room, her eyes widened. For a second, I could see confusion. The last time she saw me, I was a wreck. Now, I was wearing a tailored suit, calm and confident, talking with city officials and investors. She walked over, that same fake smile painted on her lips. "Daniel," she said sweetly. "Wow, you look different." I smiled back. Success tends to have that effect. Richard joined her, offering a handshake that felt like a challenge. "Heard you're back in business. Restoration, right?" "Among other things," I said. "Funny. I seem to recall someone once telling me I'd never recover." Melissa laughed awkwardly. "Well, time changes everything, doesn't it?" "Oh, it does," I replied. "Compound interest especially." She blinked, not getting the joke. Richard looked at me like he sensed something beneath the surface. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The balance of power had shifted, silently, cleanly. Over the following months, I began hearing rumors. Their law firm was under investigation for unethical practices, hidden accounts, client fund misuse, insider dealings. None of it traced back to me, of course. But justice has a strange way of catching up when you least expect it. I focused on my kids instead. I reached out through the proper channels, requested visitation again, this time with a team of lawyers of my own, real professionals who didn't play dirty, but played smart. Melissa fought it at first, but when the court reviewed her finances and found discrepancies, accounts linked to her lover's firm, she began to lose her footing. The judge wasn't as sympathetic this time. The day I saw my children again was the day I realized revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about balance. Jack hugged me first, his voice muffled against my chest. "Dad, you look happy again." Emily smiled through tears. "Mom said you'd given up." I looked at them, my throat tight. Never. Not for a second. That night, after I tucked them into bed in my new home, a modest farmhouse I'd restored myself, I stood on the porch, watching the sunset over the hills. The air smelled like fresh paint and pine. I thought about my grandfather, about that $40, and how something so small could change the course of a man's entire life. He'd always believed in patience, in doing right even when the world wasn't fair. Now I understood why. I wasn't just rebuilding a business. I was rebuilding a legacy. The strange thing about revenge is that when it finally arrives, it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. 2 years had passed since the night of the charity gala. My business was thriving, my kids were happy, and for the first time, I had peace. But justice, real justice, was still incomplete. Melissa and Richard were still out there, living large, smiling for cameras, pretending their world was perfect. But cracks had begun to form. One morning, I got a call from a reporter at the Chicago Herald. She was investigating corruption cases linked to Cole and Whitman Law, Richard's firm. I didn't have to say much. The truth was already chasing them. Apparently, Richard had been playing both sides of several corporate cases, siphoning client trust funds into offshore accounts. Melissa, as one of his business partners and beneficiaries, was knee-deep in it too. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply forwarded the reporter a few public documents that happened to surface: business registration forms, financial disclosures, and tax filings that had been accidentally mailed to my office by an anonymous source. Within weeks, it hit the news. Law firm Cole and Whitman under federal investigation. The headlines spread like wildfire. I sat at my desk that morning, sipping coffee, watching their world crumble in real time. Melissa's picture appeared on the screen beside her lover's. Both looked terrified, cornered, the exact way they'd left me years ago. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. The government froze their accounts, seized their properties, and launched a full audit. It turned out Melissa had been hiding assets during our divorce, violating multiple court orders. Within a month, the court reopened our case. When the letter arrived, I stared at it for a long moment. Case reopened. Walker versus Walker. Walking back into that courtroom felt surreal. The same judge presided. The same man who'd once called me financially unstable. But this time, I was calm, collected, and backed by one of the best legal teams in the state. Melissa walked in wearing a gray suit, her hair pulled tight, her once confident eyes now hollow. Richard wasn't by her side this time. He'd already been disbarred and was facing multiple charges. When the judge asked if I had any comments, I simply said, "Your Honor, I trusted the wrong people. I'm here to make things right, not to destroy anyone." It wasn't a performance. I meant it. But justice didn't need my bitterness. It worked on its own clock. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified financial documents, hidden assets, perjury. The same sharp mind that had once torn me apart in court now worked in my favor, piece by piece. When the verdict came, I didn't even smile. The judge ruled in my favor, reversing the custody arrangement, awarding me majority custody of Emily and Jack, and ordering full financial restitution for the damages caused during the fraudulent divorce proceedings. Melissa was also fined and barred from holding any ownership in her law-related partnerships for 10 years. Her life, her kingdom, had collapsed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved toward my face. "Mr. Walker, how does it feel to win after everything that happened?" I paused for a moment, glancing at the courthouse behind me. "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about learning when to let the truth do the talking." That night, I took my kids out for dinner, their favorite pizza place downtown. Jack couldn't stop smiling, and Emily kept telling the waitress, "My dad's the strongest person I know." Hearing that, it healed something in me that money never could. Later, after dropping them off, I drove to my grandfather's grave. The autumn air was cold, the sky streaked with red and gold. I knelt by his headstone, brushing away a few fallen leaves. "Grandpa," I whispered, "you were right. Patience pays off. And that $40 changed my whole life." I stayed there a long time, watching the sun dip below the hills. The same hills I used to play on as a boy. The same hills where I'd thought my life had ended, only to realize it was just beginning again. Melissa disappeared from the public eye after that. She sold her mansion, moved out of state, and from what I heard, worked as a paralegal under someone else's supervision. Richard took a plea deal, 5 years in prison for fraud. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't need to. I'd already moved beyond it. Because real revenge isn't about burning bridges. It's about building something so strong that the people who wronged you can't touch it, ever again. And that's exactly what I did. By the end of that year, Walker Restoration Company had expanded across 3 states, with government contracts and private projects alike. My team had grown to 50 men. Good, hardworking people who'd once been written off, just like I had. One day, as I looked around the office at my crew laughing and working, I realized something. The best revenge was never about money, power, or even justice. It was about peace. And I finally had it. It's funny how life comes full circle. The day I walked into Jefferson Federal, I was broke, broken, and beaten, a man stripped of everything that once defined him. I thought that account was my grandfather's forgotten $40, a relic of a life long gone. Now, years later, I stood in that same bank again, this time not as a desperate man, but as a quiet success story. The marble floors still gleamed. The air still smelled faintly of paper and polish. But everything else had changed, mostly me. The same teller, Claire, the young woman with auburn hair, spotted me instantly. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Walker, I almost didn't recognize you." I smiled. "Guess compound interest isn't the only thing that grows with time." She laughed, shaking her head. "I'll never forget that day. You looked like you'd seen a ghost when we told you the balance." I said softly. "I just didn't realize the ghost was my old self." She smiled at that, and I handed her a sealed envelope. "This is for the bank's community scholarship program," I said. "I wanted to go to kids who've lost everything and still keep trying." Her mouth fell open. "Sir, this is a check for $200,000. I nodded. "Call it gratitude with interest." Walking out of that bank, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't running from my past. I was building on it. A few months later, I hosted a small celebration at my company headquarters. My kids were there, smiling and happy. My employees, now more like family, stood around the old warehouse we'd rebuilt, the one that had become the heart of everything. On one wall hung a framed black and white photograph of my grandfather. Beneath it, I'd placed a simple plaque. "From $40 to forever, patience builds empires." When I gave my short speech, I didn't talk about Melissa or Richard or the money. I talked about resilience. "How many of you," I asked, looking around, "have been told you're finished, that you'll never get back up again?" Hands went up. Heads nodded. I was told that once. By people who thought they were untouchable. But here's what I've learned. Nobody is untouchable when you've got heart, patience, and purpose. Life can take everything from you. Your home, your savings, your pride. But it can't take your will to rise again. There was silence, then applause. It wasn't loud or wild, just sincere, the kind that comes from people who've lived through storms too. After the crowd thinned out, my son Jack came up to me. He was taller now, already 15, his voice deeper. "Dad," he said, "when I grow up, I want to work here. I want to build something real, like you." I smiled, fighting the lump in my throat. "You already are, son. Every day you get back up, you're building something." Emily, standing beside him, added, "Grandpa would be proud, huh?" I looked up at the photo on the wall. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think he already is." That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my office. The room glowed softly under the warm light of the desk lamp. On my computer screen was the same account number that had once saved my life. The balance now read $0, because I'd transferred the last of those funds into my company's employee trust, a long-term plan that would one day let every worker retire with dignity. It felt right, poetic even. My grandfather's savings had rebuilt more than one man's life. They'd built dozens, maybe hundreds, someday. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I thought about the version of me that had stood in that courtroom years ago, humiliated, powerless, watching his world collapse. If I could talk to that man now, I'd tell him this. Don't give up. Don't ever believe the world when it tells you you're finished. Sometimes life has to break you to rebuild you into the person you're meant to be. The wind outside rustled the trees, and for a moment, I swore I could almost hear my grandfather's voice, calm, proud, and steady. "Told you, Danny. The best things take time." The next morning, I woke up before dawn and took my truck out to the hills overlooking town. The same spot where, years ago, I'd once sat in despair. Now, the sunrise painted the sky gold, washing over everything like forgiveness. I watched the light touch the rooftops, homes my company had restored, buildings that had nearly been lost but stood again, just like me. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood what the teller meant that day at the bank. She hadn't just shown me a number. She'd shown me proof that even when life compounds pain, hope compounds too. You just have to let time work its magic. And that, my friends, is how a broken man with 40 forgotten dollars found redemption through patience, persistence, and a little bit of fate. So before this story fades out, let me ask you something. What would you have done if you'd found out your grandfather left behind a fortune like that? Would you seek revenge or rebuild your life from the ashes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them. And if this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a little reminder that second chances are real, and sometimes they come when you least expect them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing in stories like this. And until next time, take care, stay strong, and never stop believing in your own comeback.